There is a root vegetable that produces more calories per acre than wheat, more vitamins than rice, and survives droughts that destroy every other crop in the field. It grows in sandy coastal soil where nothing else will take root. It matures in 4 months when grain crops need 7. It fed China through the collapse of the Ming dynasty, through the chaos of civil war, through famines that killed tens of millions. And here's what makes this story worth knowing. This crop was smuggled into China by a merchant who hid the vines inside ropes. He risked execution to bring it across the sea. Within a single generation, it had spread to every province. Within 2 centuries, it had doubled the population of the largest civilization on Earth. Then we forgot what it did. We renamed it a side dish. We covered it in marshmallows at holiday dinners. We fed it to livestock. We stopped teaching our children that this single root once held the line between survival and extinction for hundreds of millions of human beings. Not because the knowledge became irrelevant, but because a crop that grows anywhere, feeds anyone, and cannot be controlled by industrial systems has no place in modern agriculture. Welcome to history's hidden harvest. If you're new here, this is where we dig up the survival wisdom that empires tried to bury. Subscribe and hit the bell, because what they erased, we remember. The archive opens in 1593 in Fujian province, coastal China. A merchant named Chen Zhenlong stands at a dock in the Spanish-controlled Philippines, staring at a plant that does not exist in his homeland. The Spanish call it batata. They brought it from Peru, and they guard it carefully because they understand what Chen understands. This is not just food, this is power. The Spanish have banned its export. Anyone caught smuggling batata out of the Philippines faces severe punishment. But Chen has seen what it can do. He has watched it grow in poor soil, where rice cannot survive. He has watched it produce massive yields with almost no irrigation. And he knows that back home in Fujian, people are starving. Chen makes a decision that will change the course of Chinese history. He bribes local contacts for batata vines. He twists them into the ropes that hold cargo on his ship. He covers them with mud so they look like ordinary hemp. When Spanish customs officials inspect his vessel, they see nothing but rope. Chen sails home with the future of Chinese food security hidden in plain sight. What Chen brought was the sweet potato, and the timing could not have been more critical. China, in the 1590s, was experiencing what climatologists now call the Late Ming Little Ice Age. 2 decades of unusually cold, heavy rains had flooded the great rice paddies of southern China. In Fujian, Guangdong, and Sichuan provinces, the complex irrigation systems that sustained rice cultivation had failed. Famine was spreading. Families were reduced to eating bark, grass, and insects. Chen Zhenlong's son, Chen Jinglun, took the vines his father had smuggled and presented them to Jin Shuizeng, the governor of Fujian. He proposed something radical. Instead of waiting for the rains to stop, instead of rebuilding the flooded paddies, plant these foreign vines on the hillsides and sandy coastal areas where rice had never grown. 4 months later, the sweet potato harvest saved Fujian from starvation. The crop spread faster than any plant introduction in Chinese history. By 1620, it had reached Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces. By 1650, it was growing throughout southern and central China. The chaos surrounding the fall of the Ming dynasty and the rise of the Qing created millions of internal refugees who were forced onto marginal land that could not support traditional crops. The sweet potato went with them. It colonized the hillsides, the sandy coastlines, the depleted soils that rice and wheat had abandoned. And then something unprecedented happened. The population of China began to rise at a rate never before recorded in Chinese history. For nearly 2 millennia, China's population had grown slowly, limited by the carrying capacity of rice and wheat agriculture. The official records show roughly 130 million people at the height of the Northern Song dynasty around 1100. 5 centuries later, the population had barely changed. But after the introduction of sweet potato and maize from the Americas, the numbers exploded. By 1750, China had 300 million people. By 1800, it had 400 million. Historians estimate the population roughly tripled in 2 centuries, a growth rate that transformed the entire social and economic structure of the civilization. The Qing Emperor Qianlong officially promoted sweet potato cultivation in the 1760s, distributing growing guides and ordering provincial officials to encourage planting. The crop was called the famine relief grain. It was recognized at the highest levels of government as the difference between dynastic stability and collapse. But the sweet potato's importance extends far beyond these historical moments. It extends to the darkest years of the 20th century. Between 1959 and 1961, China experienced what historians now recognize as the deadliest famine in human history. The official Chinese name is the 3 Years of Great Famine. Western scholars call it the Great Chinese Famine. The death toll estimates range from 15 million to 55 million people. The causes were complex, involving radical agricultural policies, collectivization, grain quotas, and natural disasters. But the human experience was simple. Tens of millions of Chinese peasants starved to death while the government exported grain and denied international aid. Survivor accounts describe conditions that modern readers struggle to comprehend. People ate grass roots and tree bark. They ate the leaves from sweet potato vines. They ate corn stalks. Villages became ghost towns. No chickens, no dogs, even the trees were stripped of bark and leaves. Those who tried to flee their provinces were sent to labor camps. Those who complained were beaten or killed. In some regions, the sweet potato made the difference between life and death. Government documents from the period record that peasants were sometimes allowed to plant strips of sweet potatoes for their own consumption when all other food production was collectivized. Local officials sometimes turned a blind eye to black market trading of sweet potato and the illegal consumption of green crops from the field. These measures, though limited, helped preserve lives until the next harvest. The scientific literature confirms what Chinese farmers have known for 4 centuries. Sweet potato produces more edible energy per hectare per day than wheat, rice, or cassava. A 2016 study published in the journal Economic Development and Cultural Change analyzed prefecture-level data across the Ming and Qing dynasties and found that the introduction of sweet potato significantly reduced the correlation between droughts and peasant revolts. The crop functioned as insurance. When everything else failed, sweet potato survived. The nutritional profile explains why. One medium sweet potato provides 120% of the daily value of vitamin A, 30% of vitamin C, and significant amounts of potassium, manganese, and B vitamins. It contains complex carbohydrates that release energy slowly, dietary fiber that supports digestive health, and beta-carotene with demonstrated antioxidant properties. The International Potato Center in Peru, which coordinates global sweet potato research, has identified it as one of the most important crops for addressing vitamin A deficiency, the leading cause of preventable blindness in children worldwide. But here is what industrial agriculture does not want you to understand. Sweet potato's greatest strength is its incompatibility with modern farming systems. Rice requires complex irrigation infrastructure. Wheat requires specific soil conditions and precise planting windows. Both crops respond dramatically to synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, which is why agrochemical corporations have spent decades promoting them through government subsidies and development programs. Sweet potato needs none of this. It grows in poor soil that other crops reject. It tolerates drought conditions that destroy grain harvests. It can be planted on hillsides and coastal areas that industrial machinery cannot access. It stores underground, safe from the floods and pests that devastate above-ground crops. A crop that requires minimal inputs generates minimal profit for seed companies, fertilizer manufacturers, and agricultural equipment producers. A crop that grows anywhere cannot be controlled through supply chains. A crop that peasant farmers can propagate from their own vines cannot be patented and licensed. This is why sweet potato production in China peaked in the 1970s and has declined ever since. Not because the crop became less useful, but because modernization meant adopting the industrial agricultural model that had transformed Western food systems. The same model that has depleted topsoil across the American Midwest, contaminated groundwater with agricultural runoff, and created a food system where three crops, wheat, rice, and maize, provide more than 50% of global calories. Consider the specific mechanism. The Ming Dynasty official, He Chaoyuan, wrote an ode to the sweet potato that captured its revolutionary nature. He described how the plant propagates so easily that a single vine can produce endless clones. How 10 years after its introduction, it had become Fujian's savior. How even when the plant appears to die, you simply cut a piece and grow another. This was survival technology disguised as agriculture. The pattern repeats across history. During the great famines of the 19th century, the late Qing dynasty famines that killed millions in Shaanxi, Henan, and Shandong provinces, sweet potato again functioned as famine food. During the Japanese occupation and the civil war that followed, sweet potato sustained populations when rice and wheat supplies were disrupted or confiscated. Each time, the crop proved its value. Each time, it was dismissed afterward as poverty food, peasant food, something to move beyond as soon as circumstances allowed. What circumstances are we moving toward now? Global food systems are more fragile than most people understand. 3 corporations control more than 50% of global seed sales. 6 crops provide 75% of the world's food energy. Supply chains that span continents can be disrupted by a single shipping crisis, a single disease outbreak, a single political conflict. The resilience that sweet potato represents, the ability to feed yourself from your own land without external inputs, has been systematically eliminated from modern food production. The 2023 study, published in Plants Journal, titled Sweet Potato as a Key Crop for Food Security under the Conditions of Global Climate Change, concludes that among basic food crops, sweet potato has the greatest potential for adaptation to semi-arid and drought-prone areas. The researchers note that climate change is increasing drought frequency and severity worldwide, and that developing drought-resistant crop systems is no longer optional, but essential for food security. The math is straightforward. Rice requires approximately 1,400 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of grain. Wheat requires roughly 1,150 liters. Sweet potato's prolific root system allows it to extract moisture from soil that other crops cannot access, producing comparable calories with a fraction of the water input. In a world where aquifers are depleting, rainfall patterns are destabilizing, and agricultural regions are shifting, the crop that saved China through 4 centuries of crisis is exactly what industrial agriculture has spent decades marginalizing. If you want to recognize sweet potato's survival potential, start with the leaves. The heart-shaped leaves grow on trailing vines that spread across the ground. Unlike regular potato, which is a nightshade, sweet potato belongs to the morning glory family. The entire plant is edible. The leaves contain more iron, vitamin C, folates, and vitamin K than the tubers themselves. In much of Asia and Africa, the leaves are consumed as a vegetable, while Western consumers throw them away. Sweet potato grows from slips, small plants sprouted from mature tubers, or from vine cuttings. It requires loose, well-drained soil, but tolerates sandy and poor conditions that other crops reject. Planting to harvest takes 3 to 4 months, depending on variety. The tubers store well in cool, dry conditions without refrigeration. In a grid-down scenario, in a supply chain collapse, in a drought that destroys grain crops, these characteristics matter. The reality check is this: the sweet potato never left. It is still the 7th most produced crop in the world. It still feeds hundreds of millions of people across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. It is still being improved by researchers at institutions from the International Potato Center to universities across the developing world. The orange-fleshed varieties bred in the last 2 decades have already reduced vitamin A deficiency in multiple African countries. What was suppressed was not the plant. What was suppressed was the understanding. The knowledge that a civilization survived its darkest years because of a crop that modern agriculture dismisses as a side dish. The recognition that food security does not come from controlling supply chains, but from crops that grow where control fails. Chen Zhenlong twisted sweet potato vines into rope to bring them across the sea. His descendants built temples in his honor, not because he was a great merchant or a powerful official, but because he understood something that we have forgotten. True security comes from crops that cannot be stopped, knowledge that cannot be erased, and plants that survive when everything else fails. Every person who learns this breaks the suppression cycle. Every garden that grows sweet potato recovers what industrial agriculture tried to bury. The crop that saved millions during China's darkest years is still here, still growing, still waiting. If this harvest revealed something for you, subscribe to History's Hidden Harvest and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve what they tried to erase. The next harvest uncovers soon.